Good evening and welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. With you today is the host. My name is Irina Tsukerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Today's topic is political instability in Somalia and the effect it has on the future of energy security. And the lens that we are looking at this topic through today is a cross section of entrepreneurship and scholarship. With us today is Guled Wiliq. He's an entrepreneur, CEO, and founder of Power Off Grid, as well as Jico Biogas, and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. And Guled, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Washington Outsider Report. Before we delve into the heart of the topic, the geopolitics of it, I would love to hear more about your companies and what you do and how you've come to this place.
Thank you, Irina, for having me. Um, we have two companies in Somalia, Power of Grid and Jico Biogas, and mainly I started as a social impact, just to make changes people's life in terms of access to electricity, clean energy, and also access to clean cooking. And Somalia, as you know, is only 15% of the people have access to electricity, and only 45% of the people have access to clean water, and only 5% of the people have access to clean cooking. So this is indicates the challenges and the also the opportunities availability in the whole African in general and also in Somalia. So this encouraged me to start an experimental initially, just to help see how I can make a difference in terms of increasing access for electricity for rural areas, and also making sure that people have access to clean water as well too. As you know, Somalia is pretty much a country that's coming out of civil war, and it's a fragile state, and you can expect that there's a lack of infrastructure, security, and whatnot. So there's so many challenges, including also elements of terrorism and whatnot. So and the fact that also Somalia is pretty much dependent on aid. So my goal is to shift away from aid dependence to self-reliant. That's how I started, and so far we kind of working on that one.
I think that's pretty amazing. But how did you end up going into this area? How did you yourself get involved in it and got to the point that you were able to offer this kind of assistance?
Yeah, initially there was a program called Power Africa, which started during the Obama administration and then continued during the Trump administration. It's called Power Africa 2.0. I was initially interested in that, and the fact that my background is also water resource management, and I've worked in hydropower projects in Asia as well too previously. So I was trying to do an experiment in a rural area. To one of my thesis was to develop a sustainable irrigation system, and while I was doing that project, I was told that people don't have access to electricity, and also the electricity is about somewhere $1 to $2 per kilowatt hour. As you know, in United States is about somewhere 8 cents per kilowatt hours. That's why we have a lot of electricity affordable. So over there is very expensive. Only people who can afford can have access to electricity. So we helped a small family provide them a solar system, and then I've taken some data, and I found out maybe there's an opportunity and or entrepreneurship that I can explore to make a difference, and that's how I started.
How so once you decided to open the company, was it a challenging experience to try to run a private venture of that sort in Somalia?
Absolutely, yeah. In Somalia, as I said, the country pretty much is the government is uh, doesn't get that much revenue from domestic revenue, so it depends on aid. and opening business in that kind of environment is very challenging too. And the fact that there's a people who have monopoly in, especially in the renewable energy sector and energy sector overall. So in for example, in people who have don't have access to clean cooking, they use charcoal. And charcoal is, as you know, deforestation. People collect firewood, firewood from the you know outside areas and then cut trees. So all those things that kind of put me to make a difference, start something called biogas, basically converting the waste to a gas so that people don't have to do and go chop trees. So but and especially women. And one of the other things that encouraged me was that because women have to access, go collect fire, for firewood outside some areas which is not safe, so they are subject to sexual violence and whatnot. And so those are the things that really encouraged me to make a difference. And despite the challenges we have, whether it's lack of infrastructure or lack of security, we try to manage and work with the local and to deliver these services.
How are you able to reach rural areas outside Mogadishu? Oh, I think we lost the
So
connection.
we have a team that have localized. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a local team in some rural areas, and we coordinate with them to work and provide those services, and so that allows us in accessing to rural areas and the rural communities. We work with the local communities in the rural areas, so they allowed us to have access to their areas, and we make sure that areas that has security issues, we try to avoid that. And we try to, it's a very challenging, but it's something that we try in our best as much we can. We've been doing almost for the last 3 to 4 years now.
How are you able to operate given what you mentioned, the monopoly of some, particular groups in this sector?
So the monopoly groups are mainly concentrated in the urban areas, because you have the more people you have, the more they will like to monopolize. But in rural areas, they are not interested. But and there's a huge opportunities in the informal sector, which is a lot in rural areas. So that's where we try to do our services most of the time in rural areas. We're trying to come back to the urban areas, but it's kind of something we're trying to our best. But in rural areas, we have, as you know, 50 to 60% of Somalia population live in rural area. So only you'll see 25 to 40%, maybe, or 30% are in urban areas.
So you start out, you build the company, you decide to provide these resources to the population. How does this process even begin? What is the starting point? How do you find where do you find a place to start? What areas do you start with? How do you reach your clients, your
So,
audience, and how do you raise funding for something like this?
So, for the starting, first of all, everybody in Somalia, as you know, you go back to your village, and that's where I started. So I go back to my where my fathers and families came from. So, and as you know, so in Somalia is a communal and also tribal folks. So you start within your own region, within your tribe, and then you start to expand it. And in terms of funding, I've worked I do also real estate here in the United States, and also um, um, other services. So, and also with the family help, that's how I slowly started.
That's pretty amazing. So you once you decide to um create something like that, you're facing the challenge of operating in a politically fragile environment, of earning the trust of the community around you, of expanding and not trying to be not to be cut down by the competition. Is there really competition in the private sector? And if not, is there any pushback from the government monopoly circles? Are they trying to prevent you from succeeding?
So it goes two ways. If you say there is a competition, yes, there is a competition, but it's not fair competition. Mostly, like I said, there is a monopoly in the energy sector, pretty much run by uh, people who in the finance sector. So you have uh, um, people who have finance sector at the same time involved in the energy sector and also involved in the trade sector. So they can monopolize the market in energy in a way that nobody will understand that. So and then there's a government. So what happened is, for example, World Bank will provide, and propose renewable energy or energy project in Somalia. So it goes through the government, and the government, most ministers are either inept and also, in addition to that, corrupt. So they try to limit people who have access to those projects to compete fairly. And so people in the finance sector who are also involved in the energy sector dominate that, and mostly are in the finance sector in Somalia either are dominated the Salafi group or Al Ittihad group mostly, and they control the energy sector, finance sector, and pretty much the trade. So and also they have a strong connection to the government. So as an investor and a private startup, you will have those challenges to go around to work and do business in Somalia. So those are the challenges.
And for our audience, if you could explain a little bit the difference between the Salafis and the Al Ittihad group that you mentioned.
So in Somalia, in in early starts in early 1980s, there were two groups. We had the Salafi group, which the most extreme that you see, the Al Shabaab, and Al Ittihad is the Muslim Brotherhood that you see, similar to the Egypt one. We had those groups. So the Muslim Al Ittihad Brotherhood mostly are involved in finance sector, and the Salafi group, because of their extremism, started the business late in the game in the 90s, and eventually uh, get infiltrated into all the sectors. So they came in and started their own business, both groups, pretty much the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafi. So they dominated those sectors, as I mentioned, the finance, communication, energy, and whatnot. So what they will do is that when you dominate it, so you will only provide service or work with the people who align on your beliefs, right? So this is where they involve in the Somali sector, and so people who work with them has to align politically and ideology with them, and that's where you can see the just like in Lebanon, right? You have the um, Hezbollah, and then the other sector of the society. So the Hezbollah pretty much dominates the economy in Lebanon. They control everything. So this is where we have in Somalia similar to the case, except in Somalia, the problem we have Al-Shabaab or Salafi groups who really dominated both in the politics and also on the extremism side in Somalia.
What is the effect of these groups controlling these sectors of the economy? What happens? What do they do with their power? Basically, how do they use it?
Well, they work with the government and they manipulate the projects. They can pretty much, for example, the finance sector. Um, if you have a competing powers, they might work with the bad elements to block your projects or your business. So, and the government has no power. Some of the government people are paid by these folks, bribed, corrupted by these folks to have access or block any competition to their business.
How are you able to operate given the fact that you've been openly criticizing these organized crime essentially enterprises?
Basically, like I said, in Somalia, you have protection in your region.
Hmm.
You work with your folks in the tribe, and the fact that, as I said, we are not involved in urban areas, so we go around their system, avoid their system. So because otherwise we could have access to more people, but those barriers. You have the government, and then these folks who are monopolizing in this environment, blocking everything that you might want to do for the people. So you try as much as you can to avoid and stay out of their way. So otherwise, that's the challenge we have. But in the long run, we're hoping that their government comes that helps the people to open, have access, equal access to competition, free market, and so that help the community. For example, in finance sector, I'll give you one example. Um, there's something called, when you have a technology, say you want to start finance technology, and you want to provide credit, or loan service or banking or anything related to that technology, and you have to connect to their system since they control the telecommunication, the finance sector. So they should have something called application integration, ABI, application program integration, that connects your app, and so you can provide the service. So they don't want you to give to have that access, those technologies, so you can access to the business, other communities to compete and provide services. So, and the government basically looks the other way or bribed and works with those folks, and so it will be, those are the challenges we really have in Somalia. And the current government, which is outgoing government, make things worse since they came to power. So things, you have, they also work with those two elements I've mentioned earlier, in addition to the finance sector and the communication, and also the security sector as well too.
So you mentioned that the current government, the Farmaajo government, is outgoing, but that's kind of been a process, so to speak, and even at the moment, as we're discussing, what that actually means remains somewhat unclear. Could you explain for our listeners what 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 exactly has been the issue with the elections, and how long is this transition supposed to take, and from what to what?
Right. So just to go back a little bit, to explain the current outgoing government, Farmaajo was elected in 2017, with basically backed by Qatar and Turkey and other elements. And at the time he was elected, he was supported with a lot of financing behind it, and through corruption and whatnot. So when he came, rather than continuing his predecessor accomplishment, for example, in the security sector, economy and whatnot, and also the constitution, he concentrated pretty much. And at the time, Somalia is a federal country, so he tried to make every the political system centralized, which is pretty much autocratic and dictatorship. That's what he tried to impose. Security got worse, and the agreed election plans that was agreed to implement, he hasn't implemented. And then this crisis came to. So by the time he was leaving, which was his term ended 2021 February 8th, he tried to extend and come up with or carry out a coup, which he didn't succeed. And then the international partners involved and tried to pretty much address the situation and come up with some kind of agreement May 17. And then and that has been delayed. So basically, he was delaying the election every time. Finally, the senator, the parliament for the upper house has been completed, but the lower house became so corrupted. For him to come back or win the election, he has to rig. So then he tried to attempt another coup, which is very amazing in Somalia. This is the first time we had a president who is not only his term ended, but attempted two coups. And still, the international donors are not taking him out of the equation, and they are keeping him. Especially the USA, UK is sometimes it's amazing. And finally, I think today, I think the second meeting of the finalizing the election is taking place without him. He's been isolated right now. He's been defeated, but the question is he is still in the equation? Is he gonna be competing for the even the election? To me, I mean that's the something I will not have allowed, because somebody who attempted a coup two times should be prosecuted and held and accountable rather than allowing him to come back. I mean, in the international world, there's no country that allows their president to commit two coups and still run the election. Is something amazing, never seen. It happens probably in Somalia.
That's indeed quite incredible. And when are the elections scheduled for now?
I think so. In Somalia, a couple things are going on. One is AMISOM, which pretty much is under the mandate of UN Security Council. Term is ending in 3 months in March. Also, World Bank provided debt relief in Somalia for Somalia, which is gonna, if they don't make elect a new president by March 22, they will cancel the debt relief program. So those things has to take place in order to avoid this crisis. The election has to be wrapped up, I believe, between before March or somewhere in the middle of February. That's what I'm expecting. But anything can happen. The fact that this former president has been isolated, he might come up with different plan. Probably nobody knows unless he's taken out of the equation. I doubt we can have a transparent election could take place as long he's in the equation. That's my biggest problem that I see, that any election can happen. But the hope is that now probably it will end by before mid February or before March.
So, what I've heard in the last couple of weeks of this political drama is that one of his main backers, a man named Fahad, was supposed to have was getting ready to flee the country. Did it actually happen? Is he still around, and what role is he playing in all of this?
So Fahd Yassin, for your audience to understand, Fahd Yassin he was former security chief of Somalia. So he was ousted about 2 months ago. He is trained in Qatar, financed by Qatar, and the challenge is that because of that influence, he was trying to flee absolutely because of those issues that he committed, the crimes he committed and whatnot. He tried to flee, but what I from some of the intelligence I've heard, inside intelligence in Somalia, is that he was kept in Somalia, and so to take also one step back, I don't know, 6 months ago or 8 months ago, the Biden administration was trying to sanction Fahd Yassin, and I think there was article of New York Times because of the things he as somebody who's a spoiler in Somalia, and also trying to rig the election. Somehow the CIA stopped that and avoided that sanction to take place. So it's strange that Biden administration has accepted such request from CIA not to sanction somebody who's involved very much terrorism and spoiling the election in Somalia.
Now, now that's strange enough. But what's even stranger is why would CIA back somebody like that to begin with, especially in light of the fact that he was literally caused the sort of political trouble that ruined CIA's work in Somalia. There was one particular military unit that the CIA used to back that has now turned into, basically, from what I understand, political infighting rather than providing security against Al Shabaab and other terrorist organizations. So Yassin is somebody who is probably a significant contributing factor to this situation. So literally, he's somebody ruining CIA's own operations there. Why would they not want him to be sanctioned? What is the relationship between him and the U.S. work there?
I cannot specify or know, especially the relation between him and the CIA. But what I've the reading from from the New York Times is that they were tracking him some kind of a counter-terrorism that he was doing. So probably they were tracking him. So they don't want something. For example, they were tracking him probably, and these sanctions probably that mission will be pretty much interfered. That probably that could be the case. But you're right. Um, since Bush era, U.S. policies towards Somalia was kind of a mixed and was pretty much mismanaged, I would say. First of all, the Department of Defense in USA train part of the Somali National Army, which is called Danab Special Forces, which is really good and really delivering, helping Somali government to, ward of the terrorism and fight against Al Shabaab. But then there is those elements trained by the CIA, for example, the one you've talked about in the North region, Puntland, which eventually is pretty much it was one family. I mean, they trained one family who were running the whole operation, and eventually was not part of that region administration and the security sector, and suddenly decided because they were involved also those folks in the piracy, you name it, illegal arms sales, whatnot, and nobody tracked them. These programs started, as I say, during the Bush administration. Somehow, the Biden administration, when they came in, have not reevaluated, and I think probably that's what Biden administration right now is doing overall Somalia, sending troops or existing troops and whatnot. So, and I think, as you know, the recent National Defense Act bill passed. There was language in there uh, demanding Secretary Belkin to evaluate Somalia program, the U.S. taxpayers, how we are funding these programs, what we are getting out of it, why we are in this situation within the coming 90 days. So Secretary Belkin have a lot of work to do to report back to the Senate, which see Biden administration is failing and not helping the interests of Somalia, for, especially in Horn Africa. And I think that's why they inserted that language in the bill.
So you're describing right now is a scenario very similar to what seems to have happened in Syria with Pentagon and CIA backing and training different groups of opposition, and some of them ended up being co-opted by actual terrorist organizations and militias and things like that. And at one point, they even actually ended up confronting one another and literally fighting one another. Two separate groups trained by different U.S. agencies, and now this union that the CIA trained appears to, you're saying, was in basically involved in activities that would normally be sanctionable and illegal,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
they may have uh, and now they're also involved in the political process. What exactly are they doing?
So luckily, the train Department of Defense, the one those trained by the Department of Defense is a little bit different than the ones
Mhm,
trained by the CIA, which is I think the only group that's left is the one that in the North region, which is now has been resolved the issue through tribal and whatnot. But
mhm,
the Farmaajo administration, which is the former president, basically not only politicized the national army and the security, also used tribal. For example, he built his own militia, tribal militia, to protect him, trained by Turkey, especially the Sadat group, which is the unit that protects Erdogan, is in Somalia. That provide special training to those groups, and those militia were used against to help him plot this coup, uh, oppress people, all those carry out assassinations and whatnot. So all those groups are still there, and that needs to be addressed. Also, the security sector, even after the election, those challenges needs to be addressed. Now, um, in some the Farmaajo, the administration, the other things. So what he was pretty much doing for the last 4 years was disintegrating, pretty much destabilizing the army. And so, because of the Fahad Yassin, who is working the Al Shabaab elements, was does not want the Somali security to improve. So they were using also, for the first time, Somalia, the government was partner with Al Shabaab. So this is why you see the results that's happening, that Al Shabaab pretty much gain all the areas they captured, uh, actually, and involve more extortion, making actually their revenues increased. So this now Shabab also is used also political gains to target the opposition, anybody who's against the government. And so pretty much the security sector needs to be reformed in Somalia, if we are moving forward. So those are the things that will be the Biden administration has to work on with Somali government.
Who is exactly the opposition, and who has been driving the effort to isolate Farmajo and Yassin and all these elements leading up to these latest current developments where Yassin has been essentially ousted for all intents and purposes?
So the opposition is two parts. One is you have the federal governments, two federal governments. So there are we have uh, five federal governments. One is the Jubaland, Puntland, Hirshabelle, Galmudug, and also Southwest. So three of them are alliance with Formaggio. Right now, they are moving away from him because of the pressure from the international. Two of them were in opposition. They are part of the opposition because of they are protecting their regions. And then you have opposition alliance in Mogadishu, who are part of the pretty much dominated by the folks in Mogadishu, and who have alliance some of the military in Mogadishu who protect them, and pretty much stop that coup that was taking place, because some of the army elements uh, saw what Farmajo was doing in Somalia is anti-democratic, so they try to stop it. So that how it was saved. But the opposition is pretty much is in Mogadishu right now, and also then you have those two federal states that are saying no to his actions, especially rigging the election and whatnot.
And you've mentioned repeatedly the interference of foreign states, specifically Qatar and Turkey. Their alliance with the Farmaajo regime, with Yassin himself. Now that they're apparently losing their main points of contact in Somalia, are they looking to gain a foothold through other means, whether by aligning with the opposition or trying to provide backing and reinsert these two back into the discourse. What is their reaction to this pushback against Farmaajo and Yassin?
So Qatar has been involved in Somalia politics since 2009, 2008 till now. They've been the one who always behind each government that comes. Previous government of Farmaajo and Farmaajo himself. So when the first coup happened, which was April somewhere of 2021. Uh, Farmaajo was about to be ousted by some of the military group. He was about to be kicked out from the Villa Somalia. But Qatar sent an special envoy for the first time that came especially to save Farmaajo from the opposition and from some of the military group. So they de-escalated the situation, um, and the opposition, some of majority, 90% of them met with them. Uh, uh, the the problem with the opposition is part of them, and I'll say majority of them are some of them are alliance with Qatar. So that's another
Oh,
challenge we have in the future. Yes. So because
so wait a
Qatar has
second,
been
question.
involved.
So wait a second. On the one hand, Yassin, who's with Farmaajo, is with Qatar, but at the same time, Qatar also is working with the opposition. How politically, how does
Yeah.
that even make any sense?
So the previous presidents also and the prime ministers, all of them are in the oppositions, and they
Mm-hmm.
used to work with Qatar, but not to the level Farmajo was doing. So they
Mm-hmm.
were fighting with Al Shabaab, they were helping the economy, trying to improve the security while alliance in Qatar. But Farmajo switched the equation. Basically, he was helping Al Shabaab, not helping the economy. So that's how they want it, because the previous governments never done the way they wanted. So now Farmajo is their guy. I mean, of course they're losing, but the opposition is still, that previous alliance is still there. So you see, it's like you have somebody relation long time ago, because you have a disagreement. It's still that is in there. That relation still exists, to my belief. Now, one of the opposition is also the prime minister, former prime minister Hassan Qaire, who is the oil man, we call him. He's
Mm-hmm.
involved. He works with Qatar, Russia, because he was involved with the Somali oil. Qatar, as you know, the way they are trying to get back to the equation now after the Formaggio is through the energy, the oil. Initially in 2019, this is the first time I reported, and a lot of people were not paying attention. That was in 2019, Qatar bought a, share of oil blocks within the Kenya area that's close to the disputed maritime area, owned by Eni, which is the Italian energy, and also Total, a French oil
French.
company. And in now, and also they partner with Exxon Mobil, right? A U.S. oil company. Now, 90% of Somalia oil drilling rights owned by ExxonMobil and Total and Eni are partner with Qatar. You see that? Now, already Qatar pretty much, uh, coming through that angle to control Somalia energy and also geopolitics. So that is
If
something which a lot of people are not getting the message.
So I wanted to pause here for a second because, to my understanding, Qatar also partners with Total in South Africa and has recently bought a stake in Egyptian oil as well.
Yes,
So what
right.
exactly? But Qatar left OPEC. Qatar considers itself more focused on LNG. Why is it? What is it looking to do in the Horn of Africa with this oil energy block? What is its interest in all of this when it has its own independent source of revenue, and is, has has a different energy basically market.
It's a two elements. The reason they are doing this is because number one, for geopolitical reasons, to be involve the politics of the Horn Africa, which is also now. Several superpowers are competing in Horn Africa, and the other part is the geoeconomic side. Qatar doesn't have a lot of, it depends on pretty much oil. So, in order to diversify its energy, it has to partner these regions, especially the regions where you have fragility or security issues, or where there's an opportunity of a huge competition with rivals, like in Egypt, the Gulf UAE against Qatar. So all of that, that's so they are trying pretty much uh, strategically setting up for them. For now, for them to come back to Somalia, the only way is through the oil energy, and also trying to revive and support some elements in the opposition to help them come back to Somalia. So this is another challenge. So as I mentioned, the previous prime minister is will be backed by the European alliance pretty much because of the oil, and also Qatar. So the question will be, the next government, are we going to have another Farmaajo or the same crisis again? Something that needs to be really as a concern for me, that the next future government will have the similar challenge, and hopefully, the international partners look from that angle.
So it seems to me that no matter who is in power, Qatar is looking to play a role, and therefore it's diversifying its political relationships to make sure that no matter which way it ends up going, it's still going to have its interests there. But given that the fact that it has played a destructive role thus far and
Mhm.
has looking to create a monopoly that's not in the interest of the local people, how is that really going to change much? All right, let's say the previous governments fought Al Shabaab. Let's say maybe they'll come back to fighting it a little bit more if Farmaajo is gone. But 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 Yassin
Okay.
was actually one of the links to Al Shabaab to begin with, and Qatar was backing it. And it sounds like Qatar also has links to, to Al Shabaab itself, and certainly was funneling weapons in that region. So essentially, Qatar is creating the situation of constant destabilization and constant political fighting. Whether they're fighting Al Shabaab aggressively or not, Al Shabaab remains a factor. It remains backed by an entity interested in having a weak federal system and a security issue that distracts from the country's energy development. That's how that seems to me the root of the problem here, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right there. The Qatar government, his goal is to control Somalia, and especially Somalia, through three process. One is through Al Shabaab, so they can negotiate with them on behalf of United States and Al Shabaab, just like they did on the Taliban, and also the
Exactly.
energy sector, so they can control the pretty much the future energy sector in Somalia, especially the oil drilling, and then pretty much control some of the elements of the future political leaders. So therefore, they are more monopoly than anybody in Somali international partners, and also working on in Al Shabaab. They done the both ways. So they want to be the negotiator of the Al Shabaab, at the same time use them as a tool to target the opposition, or regions they don't like. For example, in New York Times, I think it reported one time in 2019, I believe so, the Qatar ambassador to Somalia was caught uh, through communicating directly with Al Shabaab elements, on targeting in Puntland region. So that is
Not
pure
only do I
evidence,
remember that
as you can.
story, Mhm. Not only do I remember that story, by the way, but what I remember is that there was no follow up to that story. That's what I found
Exactly.
shocking. What happened? Okay,
And
there
at
was a
that
big
time,
New York Times report. Then what was the
right.
outcome of that? You know,
Well, at that time, we the it was the Trump administration, and I think there was the Gulf crisis was going on, so things have been on the sideway. But the sad part is the now Biden administration, they are using Biden administration right now through Taliban process, right? So they have a control of Taliban, and it's helping the U.S. government on that process. So
helping,
Biden
I would
is
say,
needs,
very.
yeah. So
They've
Biden
created
is
a
now
problem that they are now helping solve.
exactly, and I think before Trump administration left, uh, the for I think it was November somewhere last year, 2000, in 2020, not last year, 2020. Um, the former acting secretary of defense secretary met with Qatar Emir and made a under the table agreement, hush hush, to negotiate Al Shabaab to bring them to the table. Luckily enough, Secretary Pompeo found out and pretty much said, no, we're not going to do that. Because and I think and that's where the Biden administration probably, which is their biggest issue, foreign diplomacy is diplomacy first, right? They are probably trying to negotiate Al Shabaab in the future, which is really not the best interest for Horn Africa or anybody. Here's the problem: when you're negotiating with Al Shabaab, and I know Qatar is pushing that. The problem with negotiating Al Shabaab is we never uh, um, in Somalia before uh, Farmaajo government, they were on the run, right? They were on the Sikh side, but somehow when Farmaajo came, they got their strength. They gained all the regions they lost. They have got more revenue. When I say more revenue, is for example in 2016, Al Shabaab revenue was somewhere between 30 million to 50 to 60 million somewhere. Okay, 2021, according to the data I've seen and some of my estimate, is Al Shabaab revenue is somewhere 255 million to 350 million. Okay, so let's say if you want to put that from the you showed from perspective of GDP per capita, so their population, Al Shabaab population, so I call them Al Shabaab Inc. Their population is somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000. So if you divide that 300 or 255 million to 5,000 ragtags of terrorists, their GDP is somewhere about $50,000 per year per capita per person, right? That's more than America GDP per capita or UK. So when you're negotiating with those kind of people, they have more money than the Somali government. So why would they negotiate? That's number one. Secondly,
Mhm.
um, they work with Al Qaeda. Their goal is to bring Islam Caliphate in the whole Africa. They are not interested in a regular government, just like a Taliban, right? They are not interested in regular government. They see anybody within the government as a Christian or anybody anti-religion, Islam even. That's that, and they like to. That's how their terrorism works. So on the other side, in the international partners of Somalia, they have spent I don't know how many billions of dollars since maybe 2, 3 billion, 5 billion, I don't know, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, um, basically helping the security sector. But nobody spent a single dollar on propaganda, right? You want to come up with a propaganda against these people. There's no single propaganda against them. Nobody, even actually, as a matter of fact, the current government don't call them Al Shabaab or terrorists. They call them anti-peace. This is another problem we have, the messaging, and nobody's talking about that. Another issue is that Al Shabaab, they control the finance sector. They allow nobody monitor them. For example, there is no anti money laundering, right? Nobody controls them. The only region in Somalia that controls and pretty much implements anti money laundering is Somaliland region, which is Somaliland government, which that's why you don't see any Al Shabaab elements involved in Somaliland. That's why it's peaceful. That's why Taiwan is partner with them. That's why, but somehow USA does not want to the current Biden administration does not want to work with that region, which is really anti Al Shabaab and and it's a broad democracy as well too. Unfortunately, Biden has not invited them during the democracy summit, but it's something that is also the Senate leader, I believe James has added a language in the National Defense Act to set up a cooperation, security and maritime cooperation between Department of Defense and Somaliland. Somehow that language has been removed. I don't know why, but it was the best interest for the US, but we haven't done that.
Well, I would venture to guess that some of the people who are working with Qatar would probably not, and China would probably not benefit from these developments. They stand to lose
Right,
if uh I mean, Qatar is not doing what it's doing for free. It pays off politicians, not just
correct,
not just in Somalia but or Afghanistan, but in the United States just as well. That's how these
correct.
suicidal arrangements come to pass to begin with. I don't think anyone is so naive as to believe that Qatar is, this benefactor of the Somalian people or Afghan people or any other people anywhere. Which brings
Right.
me to a question: what exactly is Al Shabaab's relationship to the energy sector, and how has Qatar's involvement in the energy sector actually benefited the regular people in those, rural and other areas that you described in any way, or has it been essentially a completely self-serving process?
So Al Shabaab, the energy sector, the way they involve is two ways. One is they are exporters of the illegal charcoal business, right? This is one of their also, though there are several sanctions, UN sanctions, but the current government, outgoing, is pretty much not enforcing those sanctions. And also they work with those uh, people who have a business monopoly who import gas to Somalia for the locals who cannot afford gas not to use charcoal. You see, that's what I'm saying. So they export charcoal at the same time. They don't allow the people who cannot afford gas to use charcoal. So they sanction people who do trade within Somalia of selling charcoal, but they export somehow, and the government allows them, and nobody is sanctioning on that one. So that's where they involve in energy in Al Shabaab. Qatar is pretty much what they are involved is the uh, formal side, which is the oil energy, oil drilling, the oil drilling rights, all of that. That's what they are trying to manipulate and have a monopoly on the oil and the future of Somali energy. So the sad part is the U.S. government is not taking them out of the equation or discouraging them to involve that, and because of involving Qatar to monopolize and be part of the energy sector in Somalia will have a huge negative impact on the stability, peace, and prosperity of Somalia and overall the region.
So I wanted to kind of take a look at the energy security issue arising from these two factors. How does that reflect on the people living there? What do you think can happen as a result of these factors? And have any of these groups, whether Al Shabaab, you know, or Qataris, or their the opposition aligns with them, have they been in any way trying to benefit the local population, or has it just been, you know, or has the
The Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I was just going to say, have they benefited anybody in any way other than themselves? And because you mentioned the issues with with electricity access, with clean energy, it sounds like whoever has access to oil and charcoal has a lot of resources at their disposal and could be helping to build the infrastructure for efficient electricity and water delivery. And yet, we are seeing a major problem. Can you explain what's going on
So
here?
yeah, the folks who control Somali energy is just like I said in Hezbollah, right? Right now, and I'll give an analogy to compare Hezbollah and Al Shabaab and or the Salafi and Al Ittihad elements that control energy in Somalia. Uh, Recently, I saw a report that Biden administration is uh, asking help from Syria regime to provide electricity access to people of Lebanon because they are avoiding Hezbollah to control the electricity. So similar situation in Somalia we have because these elements that worked with Al Shabaab and also the business community that involved in this sector is basically monopolize the energy to the point that the average person cannot afford the electricity access or can afford the electricity. So what happened that will impact the economy, right? So there will be less business, involvement. There'll be less the economic mobility and whatnot. Since Farmaajo, a lot of Western and the international partners in Somalia have not paid attention that since when before Farmaajo came, the Somalia was exporting revenue was about $1 billion. Today is only $200 million. That's a huge significant drop, right? And then Somalia is importing more. For example, one of the things Somalia import is a very strange thing is they import chicken from Brazil, egg from Brazil. This is the crazy, yeah, exactly. Reason is
That
because
seems to
these
be.
elements, yeah, absolutely. These elements of Al Shabaab and the Al Tihad and Salafi group, they monopolize the productive sector for the agriculture. So, for example, what they have done is Al Shabaab they weaponize climate change. When flood comes, right? There's a protection of bank protection for the floods. They break those flood protection barriers and flood the area and force those people to flee or they internally displace them by design. So therefore,
That
the
sounds.
farmers
Mhm.
now become refugees, right? So there's no
That's
production, right? So what happened is the internal productivity of the people have been reduced. Now people are forced to buy whoever imports those products. Who imports those elements that are working behind? So that's how it's monopolized in energy, the trade sector. So they pretty much converted Somalia to a place where there is no pretty much the productive sector dies. There's nothing on it.
so essentially they've destroyed local agriculture so that the export import monopolies could benefit from forcing the population to buy from foreign markets that they control.
Correct. Just like
Completely.
Erdogan has Turkey in Syria, right? Part of Syria, that some of the areas they have taken over, lived by Kurdish people. They destroyed their farms. They destroyed their economy. Guess what? Now those Kurdish people are forced to import by importation from Turkey. So that's similar thing is happening in Somalia. So people are pretty much forced to buy. This is, but some good news is really happening, and it's very, I don't know, it's a miracle or something. Somalia somehow is number 7 or number 8 world export of sesame oil, right?
Oh,
Is the strange thing. despite all that happening, because those communities existed before colonial. They know how to produce sesame. They know, I mean, people in reality in those, this is when I'm working with the rural folks. I have been working them for last 4 years. Something I learned was they can adapt climate change, they can adapt lack of infrastructure, they can adapt corruption and government, inept government, but they cannot adapt security. This is the only thing that is stopping them to become prosper and self-reliant. And guess what? The international community is supporting a government who's outgoing now for the last 4 years, who's actually do not want people of Somalia to become self-reliant and become dependent on Al-Shabaab and also on aid. So this is the paradox of Somalia politics, and in terms of security and prosperity.
So you mentioned that Al Shabaab is actually a very small group, relatively speaking. How did they manage to acquire so much power, even if you consider that they're well armed and protected by the government? Still, a few thousand
Mhm.
people is just a few thousand people, and if you consider the major, tribes that can self-organize, create their own militias and so forth, how does that? How does it happen that they continue to thrive and survive and have such a hold when there's such a tiny portion of the population?
So it's two ways. One is they have used some of the tactics used by former dictator Siad Barre, who was ousted 31 years ago. So basically, what he used to do is each tribal community, he will set up a tribal leader selected by his own government, right? That tribal
Hmm.
leader represent the dictator, uh, but he's also a spy for them, right? He spies he's informant for the government, spies, tell and controls their secrets and whatnot. So he shares that information to the government, so the government pretty much comes. So the community trusts that tribal, and what happened is that they don't know how the government knows. So that's the way. So Shabab, what they've done is they went to each village and assigned a new tribal chief, separate, a parallel process, a tribal chief in that community, give him authority to control his people. So he will be the one collecting the extortion. He's the one who's providing the help, information, and whatnot. Now, before Farmaajo came, those were there were less of those folks, because, as I said, before Farmaajo came, Al Shabaab was on the run. They were weak. They were almost, about to give up. They were getting rid of the. But with the help of Farmaajo and Fahdias in Qatar came, these guys, in fact, not only get free extortion, they have more monopoly, more control now than anything. In fact, they know if you are a trader or importing, say, any commodity, they know the commodity name, what time it's coming, how much you are getting from the port or airport, anything. That's the amount of access information they have. So Al Shabaab, because of the
We lost you. We lost you.
get
Okay.
connect
Yeah,
disconnect.
you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, you said that you started with Al Shabaab and then we lost you.
Yeah, so Al Shabaab is pretty much is taking controlling these people by tribal chief in that community to control each community, especially in South Central areas, because the government is not helping those communities to fight Al Shabaab. So if the government itself is not helping you and the international community is not doing something about it, then that's how Al Shabaab is gaining in strength. But there were some locals who, take some arms, fought back, and kicked them, kicked the Al Shabaab out in some regions. But the the international partners and the Somali government was not helping because the Somali government is also controlling the security in Somalia. So those are the issues that's how Al Shabaab is getting away with that, with a small number to control large areas.
Now, this current situation where Farmaajo is basically appears to be either done completely or at the very least his positions are significantly weakened. That the previous governments um, might still be willing to work with Qatar and might not do much against its energy monopoly, but at the very least are more likely to fight Al Shabaab. What do you
Yeah,
foresee happening? Do you think that now that there's actually an opportunity to oust Al Shabaab, it could be this diplomacy that could force Al Shabaab back into the spotlight and actually save them from a potential defeat?
yeah, you're spot on. The future government probably will fight Al Shabaab and probably push them out, and because there is a strong will now than ever before. But because Biden administration has a good relationship with Qatar and does not see them as spoilers of Somalia, that
Hmm.
will help Al Shabaab to come back to the negotiation table just like the Taliban, and pretty much Somalia might become Lebanon. What I mean by that you might have elements of Al Shabaab representing the government and can be divided. That could be the future, and that's my worry. And Biden, who is have this illusion of no more war in America, but saying we'll go with the diplomacy, might accept that kind of solution, but it's not the best interest of for Somalia or in Horn Africa. Sitting with Al Shabaab, first of all, we have to do the basic things, right? First of all, we have to block them the financial access. We have to weaken them through their struggle of the army and whatnot. Then we can sit down, but that has to be, and also uh, AMISOM is also exiting Somalia. So those things has to be worked out before we talk with Al Shabaab. So Al Shabaab, Somalia should talk with Al Shabaab from a strength position, not from the position of weak. So that is what Biden administration is might not get the answer. So just to say, because Qatar wants them to bring them on the table so they can use them as a political leverage for future of Somalia, which is not the best interest. Uh, the problem with Al Shabaab is they listen from Al Qaeda, they work with Al Qaeda, they want Somalia to become. So Al Shabaab does not want Somalia to prosper or become a government unless they are the government. So those are the. It's not like Taliban, right? So Taliban is kind of they want to keep everything. They might say we don't want to work Al Qaeda. Nobody knows it, but Al Shabaab is straight is working with Al Qaeda. Is does not want to work with any government in the future. So either they want to have everything or they don't want. So that is the challenge with the future government, and I think there is a momentum to negotiate with them, and that is my biggest concern. And for example, you have to negotiate from the position of strength. You never negotiate from position of weakness. We never invested effort to block them from accessing to financing or fight them, as we've done before Farmaajo came, continue. Um, for example, United States, government in early days when you had Al Capone mafia, they didn't fight. They went through tax evasion, right? So that's how Al Capone was stopped. So you have to go there finance. nobody goes war or destruction without finance. So whoever financing them and how they are extorting, needs to be stopped first before we talked about any negotiation. And also from the security, also they should be defeated and remove all areas that, especially in agriculture sectors and especially in Shabelle, South Central, they have to be removed from those areas, because that is where Somalia bread and basket is, and they are controlling those areas in some, especially in some major areas.
Well, what having a group of terrorists is basic in control of energy and agriculture and major sectors of the economy is a complete nightmare. We've already seen a multiple failed state models around the world that have only created regional insecurity and human rights nightmare and economic nightmare. And having
Right.
yet another one such location in a strategic area of Africa is seems to me, undesirable, except for the corrupt who benefit from looting that. And unfortunately, I
Yeah.
mean, I there's always politicians, whether in the West or anywhere else, who do benefit from that level of international corruption and humanitarian aid organizations. I'm not even going to go into that, but I do
Right.
want to kind of almost bring this to a close and by asking a more of a positive question, which is, have you seen any countries trying to come in as an alternative or basically as competitor that can provide basic services at least to the people? Like we have seen in the past, Egypt has attempted to provide infrastructure for electricity in Ethiopia for various reasons that did not go anywhere, and now Ethiopia is facing a civil war, so all of that has taken a major kind of it's been relegated to the back burner. But do you see, for instance, Egypt or some other country coming in, or UAE, for instance, coming into Somalia, offering to build infrastructure for electricity facility? Because what you're doing, is tremendous, but it's an entire country and it needs huge investments, obviously.
Yeah. So I think mentioning UAE and Egypt, let me talk about UAE first. I mean, UAE have done a tremendous job, especially in the north regions, whether it's Puntland or especially in Somaliland. Somaliland received almost, I don't know, for the last 4 years, more than $2 or $3 billion from foreign direct investment from UAE, whether it's a port or infrastructure, and those are the kind of things that Horn Africa and Somalia needs, especially in Somalia, because those create jobs, create economic prosperity, changing the process of development, and move away from dependent on aid. So those are the things which I think UAE hasn't done that part. UAE helps uh, in the security sector, especially in the Puntland region and Jubaland, which is border to Kenya. But somehow Qatar outmuscled them in the South Central. uh, UEE, what they can do is that they should think about partnering with those folks in South Central and find people who can work with them and invest in that region. Really, this is the region in South Central is the GDP maker and the bread and basket of Somali economy, not other place. I'm talking about the small. It's the biggest, one of the biggest region, and those are the areas where the Somalia depend on economically. It cannot survive, especially between the Shabelle River and the Juba area. Without those two river belt, and those people have been victimized constantly. So if I was Egypt and UAE, so Egypt also where they can help is because Somalia has Ethiopia is foreclosing their future water rights by building more dams illegally on upstream without consultation with Somalia. That's contributing, in addition to the climate change. This is man-made. They are blocking they have issue with Egypt right now, right? The GERD, right? In Somalia, we have
Mhm.
also issue with Ethiopia on because Ethiopia only 55% have access to electricity. The rest don't have because the government is selling, exporting electricity for geopolitical reasons to have a leverage on neighbors, not interested on the people. See, so now that impacts the downstream people, whether it's Egypt or with Somalia. So if I was Egypt, I will work, will help those people, Shabelle River communities, rather going to the government. I will work with Shabelle River communities, come up, help them develop water transboundary plan, come up, maybe build a dam, small hydropower, work with them rather than going through the government because the government is a bureaucratic. Just go to those communities. Same thing with the UAE. They should work with the people of Shabelle River and Juba River who produce the economy of Somalia and the GDP makers of Somalia. So those are the things. That's how they can outsmart and outmuscle Qatar again and Turkey, which is not doing anything else except I've written a quite lengthy research about Turkey, how they are exploiting Somalia, while other people are thinking Turkey is helping Somalia. For the last 10 years, Turkey exploited Somalia, taken 5 billion. The trade deficit is, we're talking about 400% trade negative trade deficit. So Turkey is not helping Somalia and has not invested infrastructure. The port is they are using, they just came and rehab. It's just like they prepared fixed a window or just repainting something, just like they haven't done what the UAE have done for Somaliland. So UAE and Egypt have an opportunity to involve the next government to help aid and also those communities. And I think that is the positive light in terms of investment of energy, infrastructure. There's a huge opportunities for those countries to think about it.
I think what you just said is extremely important, and I'm so glad that I got to hear it because, believe me, the overwhelming information related to this issue, first of all, doesn't even touch on Somalia's water issues with Ethiopia. It's not even mentioned anywhere at all. Um, Regarding
Yes,
these positive actions of engaging grassroots communities, engaging local communities, again, this is not widely discussed. So I think having this solution oriented approach, in addition to just could help push back against this narrative that the only way to go is by inviting unrepentant terrorists to the table. um
right.
i i,
Yeah,
I
and that's
really
the
think,
scary part, right? Yeah,
yeah, because people don't know that there is anything else that could be done. There is this
right,
attention, either you do nothing, or or you negotiate with those guys. There's no imagination to imagine involving other actors and taking other action. And I think creating these solutions, creating the possibility of a more diverse response to these issues is the number one way to deter unwelcome involvement from corrupt or naive or or just wrong solutions. Um, and
yeah.
thank you again for coming in, and thank you for your incredible service. What you're doing, I think I could see
Thank you.
you hopefully playing that sort of role of being a connector between local communities and other actors and problem solvers coming in and hopefully trying to generate something positive in this very difficult but not hopeless situation. So thank you
Hopefully,
so
we'll
much
try.
for
Hopefully,
that. And I hope
thank you for
we'll
having
talk
me.
again in the near future with more more progress in a in a more positive direction. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this was the Washington Outsider Report with Guled Wiliq. Thank you for everyone joining us. Have a good evening, and I will see you again 9 p.m. next week on Tuesday on the Coalition Radio.